Bitcoin Cash price prediction for 2025, from $300 to $40,000 possible. Did you know that Bitcoin Cash once reached a market cap of over $85 billion, but today it's only around $11 billion? This is exactly where the big question lies. Can Bitcoin Cash explode again in 2025? Maybe from $300 up to $40,000? In this video, you'll get the data, the opportunities, and the risks that hardly anyone talks about. And make sure to stay until the end because the final price scenario might really surprise you. Welcome to 10 Times Crypto, your channel for honest data-driven altcoin analyses. Did you know that Bitcoin Cash once had a market cap of over $85 billion and today it's only around 11 billion? And this is exactly where an interesting question arises. Can Bitcoin Cash explode again in 2025? Maybe from 300 to 40,000 $. What actually makes Bitcoin Cash so special now? And what is Bitcoin Cash anyway? Bitcoin Cash is a fork of Bitcoin that started in 2017. The goal to be real peer-to-peer money. So fast payments, extremely low fees, blocks up to 32 megabytes instead of just 1 megabyte like Bitcoin. This means that while Bitcoin is often overloaded or expensive, a transaction with Bitcoin Cash only costs a fraction of a cent. The problem that Bitcoin Cash solves here is that Bitcoin is strong as digital gold, but rather impractical for everyday payments. But that's exactly where Bitcoin Cash comes in. It aims to make microtransactions, micropayments, e-commerce, and cheap transfers worldwide possible. But how is Bitcoin Cash technically structured now? Bitcoin Cash uses the same proof-of-work algorithm as Bitcoin. Block times are 10 minutes, but thanks to the larger blocks, a lot more can fit into a single transaction. This theoretically makes it more scalable for global use. What's also interesting is that 94% of all coins are already in circulation, so there's hardly any inflation. The community has been working on smart contracts since 2025, and Bitcoin Cash has shown in the past that it can make massive price jumps, especially during altcoin season when retail investors come in. So definitely stay tuned until the end because I'll show you different price scenarios again and whether $40,000 is really possible. Grab yourself a coffee as always, leave a like for me, and if you want to support me, become a 10 times supporter on YouTube. You can find all the information up there in the tutorial. Thank you very much for your support. But a quick disclaimer. My channel is not financial advice, it's purely for informational purposes. Alright, let's start with the market capitalization. Bitcoin Cash currently has a market cap of $11 billion. Does that already make it a high cap altcoin? Currently it's ranked 16th. Of course that can still change, but just for comparison. In 2017 the peak was around $85 billion. Today it usually fluctuates between 5 and 15 billion. So the upside is naturally limited, especially compared to smaller coins. But the stability and adoption definitely speak in favor of Bitcoin Cash. Still, compared to Bitcoin and other altcoins, it's rather weakly rated here with a 3. Circulating supply. Bitcoin Cash already has 95% in circulation, which is pretty good. Out of a maximum of 21 million tokens, 19.91 million have already been distributed. That naturally means there's hardly any dilution risk in the future and no significant inflationary pressure. And that's definitely a positive because trust in its scarcity is of course high. By the way, if you're interested in Bitcoin Cash or other altcoins, I recommend my favorite crypto exchange. For example, they also offer ETFs for crypto, so if you just want to invest in a relaxed way without having to worry, you get a portfolio that's structured like an ETF, which is automatically rebalanced, so it's pretty straightforward for you. Take a look at everything. I've also made a tutorial. I'll link it for you up here. Definitely a strong 10 here because they already have a huge number of tokens on the market, which is a positive. Next, the roadmap. The roadmap is solid and provides upgrades up until May of this year. This is mainly about smart contract improvements and some scaling enhancements. Historically, most upgrades have actually been delivered on time. That's definitely a plus point and a good sign. A strong 8 here. Next. What about the next point? How strong is the team? Who is actually behind Bitcoin Cash? I mean, many retail investors who are new to the market know or immediately look at Bitcoin Cash. There are well-known names here like Roger Ver, who have ultimately shaped Bitcoin Cash, and there are also independent developer teams like Bitcoin Cash. The team is decentralized but has less marketing power, I would say, than other projects with huge budgets. So here it's more of a solid 7. Next, what about the narrative? What narrative does Bitcoin Cash actually pursue? On the one hand, of course, we have the fork here. Originally, they wanted to be an electronic peer-to-peer option that is faster than Bitcoin, cheaper and usable worldwide. This is definitely a clear story here and will continue to be interesting. But of course, Bitcoin still dominates. And above all, there are of course increasingly stronger altcoins that have the same goal, but are technically better. Despite it, as for narrative, a strong 8. So what problem does Bitcoin Cash actually want to solve? As I said, Bitcoin is slow and expensive. Bitcoin Cash's solution here is larger blocks, more transactions and extremely low fees. That is ultimately the goal. This means that, in theory, payments in everyday life could make sense again and be made much more efficient. That's why, for a good vision here as well, a 9. So how sustainable are they actually, and above all, how energy efficient? Well, of course, Bitcoin Cash runs on proof of work like Bitcoin. That means the electricity consumption is quite high, just like Bitcoin, but on a smaller scale. Here they are a bit more ecological than Bitcoin, but not dramatically better. That's why only a 3 here as well. Then what about investors? What does the capital situation look like? Do they even have investors? Well, early backers like Bitcoin were really important in the past. But today there aren't really any classic VC rounds, so to speak. It's more community-based and of course mining rewards. That's solid, but honestly it's rather unspectacular. That's why only a 5 in this area as well. So who are actually the competitors of Bitcoin Cash? Well, they obviously compete with Bitcoin itself. But compared to Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash loses in terms of brand power. Compared to Bitcoin, it actually wins because it has larger block size and capacity, and in the end they're solidly positioned there, but they don't really offer a drastic difference or a radically different solution. So in this respect, it's more in the solid range. By the way, if you're interested in the competitors, for example, I've analyzed Bitcoin here, which is also extremely interesting for you. As I said, they're solidly positioned in this area, more like a 6. So what about marketing? They are of course strongly community driven. Roger Ver is the spokesperson here on social media, at events, and for Bitcoin partnerships. They don't have traditional marketing, they're more solidly positioned here as well. 6. So how simple is the idea behind Bitcoin Cash actually? In the end, it's actually easy to explain. They want Bitcoin but cheaper and faster. More like Bitcoin for everyday payments. I think that's something everyone can immediately understand. That's why retail investors in particular are quick to jump on Bitcoin Cash. And that's also why the price keeps rising from time to time. What do you actually think of Bitcoin Cash? Do you think the idea is good, or is it just completely outdated? Let me know in the comments. In any case, the simplicity and clarity of the idea definitely gets high marks here. Now, the long-term vision for Bitcoin Cash, they want to be the global currency for everyday use. Focus on payments, smart contracts, adoption in developing countries, for example. So in that regard, the long-term vision is clear, because the vision is really designed for the coming decades. Strong 8 here. Then deflationary, they have a max supply. As already mentioned, they're of course similar to Bitcoin. 21 million coins, hard cap identical to Bitcoin. Halvings regularly reduce the supply. So in the end, it's deflationary and solid here. Exactly what investors, of course, also love. That's why it's a strong C here. Then what about the FDV? Market cap? Around 11 billion. FTV approximately 11.7 billion. So here you can see this is an extremely healthy ratio. That's why it's also a strong 10 here. Then what about liquidity? About the volume? The daily trading volume is 283 million with a market cap of, as mentioned, around 11 billion. That gives a ratio of 0.0256. This means it's very liquid and easy to trade. That's definitely positive. That's why it's also a 10 here. Then what was the initial token distribution like? How? Was there a lockup period? Of course, it happened one-to-one, just like with the fork. There was no pre-mine, no ICO or anything like that. It was distributed through mining. So clear, solid grade A. What about the concentrations? The top 100 hold about 18%, which is quite low compared to many altcoins. You can see they don't have extreme centralization. Strength 7. What are the uses of the token? Payments, smart contracts, NFTs, e-commerce. Simple but real use cases. Strength 8. How strong is the Bitcoin Cash community? They have a strong community, especially on Reddit and Twitter. They really have a lot of hardcore fans. If you also hold Bitcoin Cash, if you're a fan, then write in the comments why you think Bitcoin Cash is so great and use the hashtag BCH. That way, you support your community and Bitcoin Cash gets more attention on YouTube. That was a strong 7, so what events are still coming up? Extremely important. As mentioned, this year they received a major upgrade, plus new integrations, developer conferences, all factors that can of course lead to price movements. They are still quite active in development, which is a positive sign. Smart. 8. You know what has become clear to me after this analysis? Bitcoin Cash is far from dead. In fact, it's a coin that many people actually underestimate a bit. But now let's take a look at the facts according to the 10 times formula. The valuation is in a solid range. With over 94% already in the supply, there's hardly any dilution, which is a positive. The roadmap provides clear upgrades, which is also a positive. The community remains loyal to them, and that's been the case for years. So in that respect, compared to the competition, for example compared to Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash actually has a bit more adoption, better liquidity, and a more understandable narrative. Peer-to-peer cash for everyday use. In the 10 times ranking, they land at 73.2%, which is quite positive and actually a solid rating, I have to admit, something I personally didn't expect. So Bitcoin Cash isn't exactly an insider tip, but so far it's been a stable altcoin. An honest assessment, Bitcoin Cash is of course not a 100 times moonshot, but as a payment coin, with its deflationary nature and scarcity, it's still a solid player. By the way, if you like these data-driven altcoin analyses and want to dive even deeper into the world of altcoins, then check out the 10x Elite. There you'll get full access to the 10 times ranking list, insight into my portfolio, weekly updates on what's happening in the market, and a ton of other interesting things that give you an edge in the market. I'll link the tutorial up here. Take a look at it and see for yourself, and then you can decide if it's worth it for you. You can find all further information in the video description as well. You know, what really fascinates me about Bitcoin Cash is the extremely different scenarios, especially looking ahead to the future. Because it ranges from almost forgotten to a massive comeback. Is everything really possible with Bitcoin Cash? But let's talk about the possible price scenarios. What does the bear scenario look like? In that case, Bitcoin Cash remains more of a niche asset. Adoption stagnates and Bitcoin Cash could end up somewhere between $300 and $700. That's not a massive breakthrough. Let's move on to the normal scenario. Here, Bitcoin Cash manages to establish itself as a real peer-to-peer network. More merchants accept it. The fees remain unbeatable and cheap. Then we're talking about prices between $700 and $1,400. That's realistic, but still far from the all-time high. But now it gets more exciting. Let's talk about the optimistic scenario. Here, adoption grows faster, especially in developing countries and online commerce. If Bitcoin Cash captures market share there, we could see price targets of $1,500 to $3,000. That would be a comeback that would actually surprise many. And now imagine the optimistic scenario. Bitcoin Cash establishes itself as a global low-cost payment currency with smart contracts. Could it really gain a foothold in the DeFi sector? In this case, we're talking about prices from $3,000 to $7,000. Of course, that's a level that would really make long-term investors in Bitcoin Cash happy. But now, a look at 2030. It could be possible by 2030. The crypto markets as a whole would explode massively, adoption would progress, and Bitcoin Cash would really extend its lead. Then, price targets of $2,000 to $40,000 would be possible. That sounds extreme, but Bitcoin Cash has been among the front runners in altcoin seasons for years. Now, of course, the question you're asking yourself is, what does the current situation look like, and what would I do? That's why I'm going to show you my chart analysis again now. Yes, hello, and welcome to my chart analysis of Bitcoin Cash. First, for your information, I use TradingView and a self-developed indicator. As mentioned before, I have two, one more for trading and one for dollar cost averaging to get the best entry points. Here I'm using the trade analysis because it's simply a bit more short term. A quick example, it's about oversold or overbought zones. For instance, here a lot of people have sold. That means we're in the oversold zone here. That means my indicator shows this with a green dot. that would be an entry opportunity for me. And red always means, for example, when we're slowly entering an overbought zone, more and more people are buying. These are then the overbought zones in the end where I could, for example, take partial profits or exit the altcoins or the market entirely. Depending on the market situation, what does the current situation look like at the moment? And as you saw, we are here, have been steadily rising, as I said, especially with retail investors entering the new market. They immediately start dealing with Bitcoin Cash, which is why the price usually rises as well. In any case, in the current situation, you can see that these would have been good entry points, but also here. But now at the moment we've climbed quite high, and now we've also formed the red zone here and here as well. That means, of course, these are possible exit points, and at the moment, the thing is, we're currently in the overbought zone, as you can see. So for me, this is definitely not an entry point right now. I would definitely wait here until we go down and enter the oversold area again. And then, when my Cenix indicator forms a green signal there, that would be an entry point for me. By the way, if you want to stay up to date, I share a market analysis and my Cenix indicator every single day. And I share all of that in the Cenix Elite. You'll be in the best position there. Now that you know the price scenarios for Bitcoin Cash, I recommend you also check out the analysis of Bitcoin. I've fully analyzed in this video why Bitcoin could overtake Bitcoin Cash and why Bitcoin is so strong. Have fun with it. Thanks for watching and see you soon.